My primary focus as a musician for a long time has been to not just write electronic music, but to be able to perform it in live settings. And in doing so, my setup has changed and evolved over the years, and I've learned a lot about it. And a very important component of that, both in terms of in the studio and in a live setting, has been my audio interface. And I wanted to just kind of do a rundown of what I thought about the Antelope Audio Zen Tour Synergy Core, which I had for about a good 5 years. And then this Apollo X4 Gen 2 that I've had for a few months now. And my reason for switching it, the pros and cons, and really the predominant factor being having been on this path for quite a while to try to figure out how to do live mastering. So just a quick rundown about that. One of the problems I kept running into is that when I have a track or stems or anything like that, that I've gotten to where I want it to sound, when it's released ready and all that stuff, it sounds great in its own merit. But when I'm actually performing a live instrument, in addition to that, what ends up happening is that those two things are competing for the same space. And so in a track that's been professionally mastered, or whether it's been internally mastered, or it's got a limiter or maximizer, all that stuff, that track lives on its own, and then the instrument lives on its own. So when I stack those on top of each other, and when I'm performing live, one of my frustrations for a while was that the dynamic range of it was getting compressed between the two. And so even if I compress my instrument and compress that and do that, they're not going into the same signal path. So therefore they're being compressed or limited or maximized individually. Now for me, as somebody who plays a Chapman stick and has been playing for a long time, I already am dealing with a pretty limited dynamic range just because of the inherent nature of the instrument. So when you're tapping, you just don't have a wide dynamic range, where on a guitar, other instruments, you have a much wider dynamic range. So that became an additional problem because I really wanted for my live performances to allow me the space to have a good amount of dynamic range while still having a lot of the foundational components that you use in electronic music and really kind of getting everything glued together. So that was really the primary reason that I ended up switching to the Apollo unit. Now, with the Antelope audio unit, I had it for 5 years, never had any issues with it. I'd read negative things about it, and it's always like anything else. It's a personal experience. They were always great about any response to any kind of tech questions or anything I had. The other thing that were great about it was you had 8 physical inputs, which was great. And when my setup was much more complicated, I was utilizing all 8 of those. On the output, it was more limited, but you also had an attachment which kind of gave it the same thing as you do with the Apollo. With the Apollo, you have technically 4 inputs. It has a lot more outputs that are already built into it, so that part of it has been nice. Really side by side, in terms of preamps, especially now that I'm going in directly with the instrument, I haven't really noticed much of a difference. I feel like they're up both at about the same level in terms of how clean and precise they are with their built-in preamps. And that part of it really didn't make much of a difference between the two units. This unit does run a lot hotter than my Antelope Audio. That's something to take into consideration, but so far it hasn't caused any issues. It just runs hot. The other thing I've noticed, and this may be a personal thing, is when I would stack up, even though the Antelope unit was older, when I would stack up plugins that were running on the DSP itself, it seemed to handle more than this does. And I know this is a newer processor and everything, and of course you have more options, but that seemed to be able to handle more things in a pretty comfortable way. Now, my primary reason for switching to this was simply because of the fact that Universal Audio just has a lot more plugins to choose from. And what I really wanted to do is I wanted to create a live mastering chain to where my tracks, my stems, whatever I'm doing, are running in conjunction with the live instrument. So they're both going into one mastering chain, and that's being compressed, limited, and maximized. And so that was the reason I switched over to this, and luckily it's been a success. It's a work in progress, but I think the live mastering component of it has really kind of allowed me to have that dynamic range that I was looking for, where everything is already not pumping on the track side, and in addition, when I'm playing an instrument, then it's just kind of getting overbearing. So essentially what I did with this is, for this unit, I ended up putting, I'm going directly with the Chapman stick into the Apollo unit. I've been trying to simplify my setup too. That's just a personal thing. For a long time, I was heavy into guitar MIDI and doing a lot of that stuff. And because of some of the changes that have happened, and also just probably my own getting older and just wanting to deal with less cables, I'm trying to do a simpler setup. So what I'm doing here is I'm just basically doing 2 preamps, one for the melody side and one for the bass side. And that's going on the into the Apollo unit. From there, I go into main stage. That's a more complicated setup where I have different plugins for different presets and all that stuff. But the main thing, really the biggest part that I wanted this unit for, and that's worked out for me, is to be able to then on the outboard add a very simple mastering chain. Something that in my situation right now, and this is subject to change, but what I'm doing currently is I'm using an Oxford inflator just to give it a little bit of distortion, and then using a glue plugin, the solid state logic, just doing a little bit of gluing so everything comes together. And then the third one is just using UA's own maximizer. So with these 3 plugins, essentially what I'm doing is when I'm writing a track and I'm playing on it, they're coming together and they're getting glued. The sound is a little bit more cohesive, a little bit more concise. There's more dynamic range, and everything just breathes a little bit more. So really, ultimately, bottom line for me has been that part of it. And because I am so focused on performing live, doing electronic music, but as an instrumentalist, I don't have the luxury of being able to just DJ a track or something, but I want to be able to actually play a live instrument. Those 2 things working together and running through a single mastering chain has really made a difference. Now, this can be for a much more complicated setup. It can be for a full band setup. If you're doing live mastering, sending it out to the front of the house or doing different things, that gets a lot more complicated. And whether it's worth it or not is really, I'm not sure. But for me, as somebody who mostly performs as a solo artist, and whatever I'm feeding out is just basically a stereo signal of what I do, and oftentimes is running through my own PA system, this has worked out well for me. And these are expensive units. It's always challenging to pick them out. And this is not by any means an endorsement, since I'm still paying for this unit. But it was really more about my personal experience. And for anybody, I know over the years I've looked in forums for some people that are into trying to do like a live mastering chain without an actual outboard. This has been so far pretty successful for me, and I'm pretty happy with it. Over time I may change the plugins or do different things, but as it stands right now, I was trying to keep a very simple mastering chain so that I'm really cleaning things up on the back end of it and then setting them into this and being able to do instrumentation and tracks at the same time. I'm going to do a quick segment of one of my tracks called Beauty of Uncertainty. Normally in the past, this would be a pre-mastered track, and then I would be playing over it. And it really the dynamic range was just, you could just see it. It was just solid. But now I've got it to where I've got it mixed to where I like the track to sound, but there's no limiter, there's no maximizer, there's none of that stuff. And that's happening on the Apollo side of things, in addition to my instrument, which is also getting some basic compression, a little bit of delay, everything like that. But again, is going straight into the outboard. One other thing to note is that for the sound ID reference, if you use headphones, which I do for mixing, it was a little bit of a hard pill to swallow because I already own sound ID reference and I use it quite a bit. So I thought it was a little bit gimmicky, and I think at $70 some to have to pay in addition to what I already have to have it at the outboard side of things. But as it turns out, that's actually been pretty useful too, because it's kind of made me so that I click it on over here and I just know that it's calibrating my headphones, and everything that I'm hearing, not just through Logic, but everything that I'm hearing on the outboard side of it is being adapted to Sound ID's waves that are basically trying to make your headphones as flat as possible. So here's a little segment just to kind of showcase how the sound coming together just has a little bit more of a breathing room. And this song is in style of a melodic house tune, one of my own, but I think it's a good example of how the mastering components in a live setting actually help this out. Anyways, no endorsements here of any kind, but there is probably a segment of people that are considering what audio interface to go for, and these are high-end stuff, and this is really for when you're getting into much more complicated routing, and your preamps are much more important than everything. And really, when it comes down to it, I have deep respect for what the Antelope audio device did, as well as from everything that I've experienced with this so far. It's been great. You can find a Zen Tour Synergy Core for quite cheap nowadays, and it's quite a bargain to get secondhand, and it does quite a bit for what it is. And again, for me, this was really trying to build a mastering chain, and maybe over time when the portfolio of Antelope audio expands, I'll definitely look back into that as well. But I think for me, just to be able to have these three components and to be able to do it to where if I'm even playing the instrument, it's going through that part of it and it's giving it that dynamic range. And when the track's coming in, it's calculating all that stuff together, just makes for a better live experience. And so if you've ever considered an audio interface, or really just thinking more about ways of doing live mastering, I think this is something that for me has taken years to get to, but finally I'm pretty happy with where it's at. And so it may be helpful to you. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, just write them down in the comments and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Thank you.